So learning your basic stitches is really important to be able to become a proficient bead weaver. Recently we did the flat sample stitch bracelet and we're going to be doing round stitches. So we're going to be doing the tubular stitches in a number of different styles. For this, I would recommend some 8/0 and some 11/0 seed beads. Gather up your supplies, and if you need exact material lists, go ahead below the video in the description to shop with us online. So we're going to start out very simple with some 8/0 seed beads, and we are going to do our peyote stitch. We're doing a tubular peyote stitch, and we are going to begin with a stop bead on some black thread with a size 10 needle. We're going to be doing peyote stitch, herringbone stitch, and you're going to learn right angle weave tubular, which is called crawl. To start with the peyote stitch, we are going to go in and we are going to add a total of 6 beads. Black, silver, black, silver. I always love to do sample stitch pieces with drastically different colors. It helps to keep track of where you are in the stitch. Coming out of the beads here, or after the beads, I want you to go back through the first 4 beads. So start at that stop bead, go black, silver, and come on out. What we're going to do now is we are going to start our peyote stitch. Each level of peyote is going to start with 3 beads. So I want you to pick up exactly which bead you're going over top of, or the opposite color of what you're coming out of. So I have my silver bead here that I'm coming out of. I'm going to pick out another black bead and sew through the silver bead. Now, originally when you do tubular peyote, it kind of wants to sit out to the side there. We're going to force it to sit in a circle as soon as we are done with this row. We're going to add another black bead, sew through the next silver bead. So we're going around in a circle, and make sure that those black beads that you just are adding kind of sit on top of the black bead that's already there. Add another black bead, sew through the silver bead, and then what we're going to do is called a step up. We're going to sew through that first black bead that we just put on in this row. So not through the original black bead, through the first one in that row. And see how this kind of sets up right away? The black beads will stack right on top of one another, and the silver beads, as we add, will stack right on top of one another, and we'll have lines in our peyote stitch. So from here, I'm coming out the black bead, the first one that we just added in that group of 3, and I'm going to add a silver bead. Sew through the next black bead, add a silver bead, sew through the next black bead. So you're always sewing through the last row that you completed. Add another silver bead and sew through the next black bead. So I've added 3 silver beads, so I know this row is complete, and I'm going to step up, stepping up through the first bead that I just added on this row. Once again, I now know that I'm coming out of the silver, so I'm going to add 3 black beads between each of the silvers. Black bead, sew through the silver, black bead, sew through the silver, and so on. After you add your third bead, after you add your third bead in each row, you're always going to sew through the first bead that you added in that row. So I added the 3 black beads. I finished sewing through that silver, and I'm going to sew and bring my needle out through that first black bead that I just did. I'll do one more row with you, and then we're going to keep going. So now I'm connecting all of my black beads here, adding another silver on top. Black bead gets added, or silver bead gets added. I go through the black bead, and then as I know that I'm adding my last silver bead, I'm going to go up through the first silver bead that I just added in that row. That, my friends, is tubular peyote. So you can see how you have the lines, black bead, silver, black, silver. So every row, you're adding 3 of the opposite color. Coming out the silver, you add 3 black, and you can do this as wide as you want to. So if you only wanted to do, or if you wanted to do 8 beads at the start, you can do that. And then always stepping up through the first bead that you put on as you started that row. Now that I'm coming out of the black, silver will be added, and we'll continue on with our long piece of our peyote strip. So once you're at the end of your stitch, there's a couple different ways that you can end it. I'm going to show you how to close it off so that way you know how to do that. In my sample version, I actually did a glue-in magnet and glued into that. Now, obviously, I have more to go. And if you start to see that your piece is spiraling like that, that's a different one that you can do. How to get it to spiral, don't do the step up. But you should have it nice and flat. I'm going to go in and add some thread to the beginning and continue that way. So I'll show you how to do the end now. So as you're doing and coming out of your last stitch, I'm going to, instead of adding any beads, sew directly through all of my black beads because I'm coming out of the black bead. And see how that just kind of closes up that tube, makes that triangle with the beads. It gets a lot easier to have it completely closed then on that angle. From here, you can, if you want to, add some 11/0s, up to you. I'm going to just use a wire guard and a wire protector. I'm going to be attaching all of these samples to my magnetic, strong clasp guard and clasp, just with some jump rings and some wire guards. So I'm going to take the wire guard here, go right up through the wire guard, come on down through the other side, and then what we're going to do is go into the bead that sits either right after it or the one after that, and you're going to sew into it. It's an odd count, so it doesn't really matter. It's not going to sit exactly straight, but it'll sit coming out through the middle. Coming out that bead, we're going to go back up through the wire guard. So the thread loops around that bead. See how it has like that little loop there? Pull nice and tight. That'll get it to sit in the center. Go back down the other side of the wire guard. So for all of these stitches, we'll bring them into a close. And then once again, wherever the thread is coming out of, you're going to go into the opposite side to kind of pull it towards the center. After this, we are going to get rid of the thread. And how are we going to get rid of the thread? We are going to sew back along the peyote stitch. So we're just literally sewing backwards down through the peyote stitch. So we make sure we don't see any extra thread. Once you get down a couple stitches, go ahead and grab your thread right there underneath, going underneath that bridge thread, the thread that connects one to the other. And then simply take your needle through, or your thread through, that loop that you created underneath one time and 2 times. This same technique is going to be used when we finish off all the stitches, going in, sewing back down the stitch a little bit, and then tying it off in that section. Grab your thread burner, burn off the extra thread, and burn it down flush towards the project. Now, obviously, like I said, I have to go down and continue on making mine a little bit longer. And then at the end, I'm going to do the exact same steps to put on my wire guard. Next up on the agenda is going to be tubular herringbone stitch. So how are we starting out tubular herringbone stitch? We are going to begin the tubular herringbone stitch with a ladder stitch that is going to be 2 wide. So we're going to do 2 beads and then another set of 2. And first I'm using my silver lined Montana, and I'm going to put on 4 beads and then go back up through the first 2. And these are 11/0 seed beads that I'm using. That stacks 2 right next to 2. That's going to be one color of my herringbone, one side of it. From here, I'm going to go down through those 2 beads, and we're going to add in 2 of our black beads. Sew back through those 2 beads that your thread is currently coming out of, and then sew back through the 2 black beads that you just added. Threads at the top here, we're going to again add 2 more black beads, so into the opposite side that your thread is coming out. And once again, just like the flat stitch sample, this tubular stitch sample, we have videos on each individual stitch. So if you want a more detailed version, you can certainly check that out. After that, I'm going to go in and add 2 silver beads and sew them onto the 2 black beads. Again, this is a ladder stitch style, so if you did the flat sample, you've already learned that. 2 more, and that gets me my starter rows. I'm going to go into the opposite side and come down those 2 silver beads. Now remember, if you are learning these stitches, you can always take this video and you can pause it as well as rewind so you don't have to go as quick as I'm going here. From here, we have our grouping of 2, 2, 2, 3 groups of 2. And what we're going to do is we are going to make it go into a tube. So my thread is currently coming out of the bottom of the silver beads. I'm going to go into those silver line Montana on the other side, and my thread's coming out the bottom of that silver. I'm going to go out through the bottom to the top of that on the opposite side. Just move that stop bead kind of out of the way. That's going to roll this out into a tube. See how we get a tube? And then we're going to go down through the silver beads, the opposite direction, to pull that together, just in that tubular ladder stitch. See, it makes a nice little beaded bead too. And then we're going to go back up through our silver lined Montana. Now, coming out that silver lined Montana, we are going to begin our herringbone stitch. So a herringbone is based on adding 2 beads at a time. We're coming out of our silver lined bead here, the first one at the top. We're going to add 2, and we are going to sew down through that first of the 2 silver lined beads from the original ladder row that are right next door. What's going to happen then is those 2 beads are going to sit right over the top, sitting almost in a little V section with those holes facing up. From here, skip over to the black side, and we're going to do our next side of our herringbone stitch. So up through the first black bead. When you're out that black bead, go ahead and add 2 more black beads. 1, 2. You're going to sew down through the first black bead next to it. So there's 2 groups of 2. We're coming out of the second group before the second bead, just right out after the 1. That lays those 2 black beads right over top as well. Spinning over then, I'm going to go up through the top left silver bead there. And then add 2 more silver beads. And go down through that first silver bead on the right-hand side. Now we are set up to do our herringbone stitch. That just did our first row. Just like the tubular peyote stitch, we need to step up. To step up, you're going to go back through the bead that your thread was first coming out of, that silver bead there, that silver line bead, and also through the first bead that you added as you were going around creating this row. So I'm going back through that first silver bead. When you're coming out that first silver bead, you can see my rows here. 2 more beads go on, just like we did. I'm going to go down through the silver lined bead on the right hand side. So always coming up the bead on the left, adding 2 beads, going down the bead on the right. To connect to the next one, you're going to go up through the bead on the left. This time we're on our black side. Add 2 beads, go down through the bead on the right. Spinning around, next side, up through the bead on the left in the silver color. Add your 2 beads and go down through the bead on the right. So we just added 6 more beads total. We added 2 beads to each side of our herringbone stitch. See how it kind of sits fanned out? It does that until you do the next row, which will bring that row together. From here, we need to go back to our starting spot to connect the 2 together, which is back through that first silver bead, silver lined bead that our thread was coming out of. And we are stepping up, coming out of the first silver lined bead that we just added in that row. So we just completed basically our what looks like our 4th row. And we're going to go on to our 5th. I'll do this one a little faster. 2 beads go on, down through the bead on the right. And this is one of my favorite stitches, it's herringbone. And when it's in the tubular for a rope, this is my favorite for the tubular rope. Go up through the black bead, and you can see I'm constantly spinning in my hand. Every time you're working with tubular stitches, you start to rotate it in your hand as you're working with it. 2 beads go on, and I'm going to go down through the right-hand side. Spin over. I still have my silver to go. Going up through my silver bead, the first one, which as I turn will be the bead on the left. Add 2 silver beads. Go down through the silver on the right. Once you're down through the silver on the right, then it's time to do our step up. So how do we step up? We go what looks like up 2 of our silver lined Montana, or that silver lined gray color. You're going to go up through the bead that you first were coming out of as you added that last row, as well as the bead that you just added first in that row. So see how these get connected? You have those rows starting where their beads are sitting right in that herringbone style, one in top of the other, and you're going to just keep going and keep going. Again, this is my favorite stitch here. It is in Delica's. It's my favorite stitch for a nice cord or rope to wear lots of pendants. This one here is 3-sided. This one in the example is 2-sided of that herringbone stitch. So to show the stitch as you're getting a little bit taller here in a little bit further of that tube, you can see those rows really forming well of the silver, the black, and that nice Montana. Now, if you want it to spin and turn and twist into a tubular, twisted herringbone, right when you get back to that silver lined Montana and you finish up adding all of your beads to each side, you're always going to seem like you're sewing up through 2 of those beads. That's because you're stepping up to get to the next row. If you skip that first bead and go right away up to the second bead, that starts to create that twisted herringbone. So just like I showed with the twisted peyote, if you don't do the step up and you miss a bead and you jump right up to that last bead, same thing with tubular herringbone. If you miss that bead and jump right up to the top, that's when you'll start to get that spiraling effect where the colors go in a spiral rather than nice and straight like we are working on and accomplishing. So when you get to the end of your herringbone strip, what you are going to do is add 1 bead instead of 2 to each of your herringbone rows. You can see that nice pattern of the gray, silver, and black. Coming out that nice gray, I'm going to add 1 bead instead of 2, and then sew over through the black. Again, add 1 bead instead of 2, sew over to the silver. So I'm going down the black, up the silver. You can see as it gets longer how easy it is to kind of go through 2 beads at once. Go through the silver, and then just like normal, step up through the silver as well as the single silver, that silver lined. And now just like we did on our peyote stitch, we're going through and we're just connecting all of those single beads. And see how that pulls it in nice and close and completely closes up that tube that we created. From here, we're going to do the exact same practice to add our wire guard. And then on the other end, we're going to do the same thing, taking off this stop bead, adding 1 bead between each one of the ladder stitch, and then seaming it up to add my wire guard to each end. After this, it is on to crawl or to right angle weave in a tubular fashion, which is going to get us our crawl stitch. Now that we have the other 2 stitches down, we are going to learn crawl or our tubular right angle weave. You can see here in the sample piece, you are going to have beads that the holes face on the horizontal, and you're going to have beads that the holes face on the vertical. Beads are stacked like blocks, one on top of the other in a right angle weave fashion. We're going to start out with 8s, then we're going to switch to 11s and go back and forth just to add some variety to the stitch and the bracelet. To begin with, I want you to add 4 beads onto your thread and needle, and I just have a stop bead there on the end of my 3.5 feet of thread, and I have black, silver, and I'm going to let that fall down next to my stop bead. From here, I'm going to sew through the first 3 beads toward the 4th bead, which is going to bring them around into that little square. So see how the black beads are facing, so their holes are up and down. The silver beads are facing, so the holes are left to right. We're going to add 3 more beads. We're coming out of a black, so we're going to add a silver for the bottom, a black for the right, silver for the top, and now we're going to go into the top of that bead that our thread is currently coming out of, and that is going to make our second right angle unit. I need to get over to that black bead, so I'm going to go through the bottom silver, and I'm also going to come out through the black bead as well. So in the start, we sewed through 3 beads and came out before the 4th. We did the same thing here, coming back through that bead on the left, sewing through the bottom, and then coming out the bead on the right. When you're doing traditional right angle weave, you're always coming out that bead on the right. Now, we are going to switch it up a little bit because we are doing it in a tube. So what's going to happen is we are going to start building basically on top of rows and rows and rows on top of what we'll call our apartment complex. So I am going to connect the right side to the left side here. I need one bead, one silver bead that's going to be the top. I'm going to sew down through the bead on the left. So coming out the top right, I'm going to go top to bottom left after adding a silver bead. From here, I'm going to add a silver bead to the bottom also, because we're connecting those two sides, and I'm going to sew back up through that black bead. Now watch what happens as we pull that. It forces this into a tubular shape. See how we have the beads now, that the silver beads are stacked one on top of the other, and the black beads are stacked side by side. Now what we need to do is build our next set of boxes, or our next little apartments, right on top of the silver beads. So normally right angle weave, we're going through and we're connecting onto those black beads and building and building. Now we're doing like a multi-row right angle weave, and we're going to build on top. I'm going to take my thread and needle, sew through one of those silver beads here, and we're going to create another little box off of this silver bead. So off of this silver bead here, we're going to add a black bead for our right hand side of our box, a silver bead for the top of the box, and a black bead for the left side of that box. My thread and needle is going to come over to the opposite side and sew through that silver bead that's already there. So my thread was coming out that silver bead. Now I'm going in and see, I created that next little right angle unit right beside. Just like we did previously now, I want to come out that right-hand side of my box. Here's where some people get a little bit lost. Again, I have a video showing how to do this in more detail. We're going to spin to our second side of our crawl stitch here. We're coming out of the top of the black bead. We're going to add one silver to be the top of our next box, one black to be the right-hand side, and we're going to go through that silver that's sitting right next to it from the right toward the left. Pulling that through, we get another box. I'm going to sew back through that black bead that my thread was originally coming out of. Then I'm going to sew over through the silver at the top, and we're also going to sew through the black bead that's there. Sewing through the black bead, we're going to sew from the top down to the bottom as we get through that black bead. Again, we're coming out that right-hand side. See, we have 2 by 2, 2 by 2. Over here, we need to build one more. My thread's coming out the bottom. I'm going to sew through the silver bead from the box below on the other side. And I'm also going to sew through the black bead from the first box that I did on this second row. Joining those two together, all I need to do is get a silver bead at the top, sew down the bead on the left, that black bead. And again, I know this one's a tricky one, but you're just thinking about it as if you're building block on top of block and sharing sides. I'm then going to sew through the silver bead, and we're going to sew up through the black bead. We're coming out the black bead, but I have nowhere else that I need to go. So I'm going to go through my silver bead that sits right above. And we're going to start this process over again. Coming out the silver bead, we're going to add a black, silver, black, because we need 3 more sides to this first box. So into the opposite side of that silver bead, creating the box right on top of that silver bead. From here, we're going to get to the right-hand side of this right angle unit. Going through the bead on the right or the left there, going through the top, and we're going to make sure that our thread is coming out that rightmost bead. When the thread is coming out that right-hand side of the bead, you're going to look and spin to the next side of your tube. Coming to the next side of the tube, your black bead is right there lined up, and then all you need to do is sew through the silver bead. That's there on the opposite side. Spin that around and see how that's lining up nicely. We're going to do one more black bead to go along the side, one more silver to create the top, and then once again down through that black bead, and then over through the silver to create that next box. Those two boxes are side by side. We're going to go up through the bead on the right here. And as we go through the bead on the right, what we're going to do is spin on over here and look what we need to add to our box. Adding to the box, all we need to add is a silver for the top of the box. We're going to catch on to the black that's on the right-hand side already from that first unit that we added. Sew through that silver bead that sits to the bottom. And then we're going to go up through the black. And guess what? We're back at the top. Sewing through that silver and then getting ready to repeat. So see how as you build this cubic right angle weave, your silver beads again are always sitting so the holes are facing right to left, and the black beads are always sitting so that the holes are facing up and down. You should be able to take your needle and go through each one of those three sides of black, so when you look straight down, you should have basically a triangle that we have black beads down, black beads down, black beads down. When you turn it, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of silver beads to start. I'm going to keep building on my right angle weave rows in this cubic right angle weave. So we're not doing 4 sets, we're doing 3, but it's the same thing, concept over and over again. Here I am at the top coming out of one of those 3 beads, add 3 more, circle around, go through the black bead for the side there. Once I'm through that black bead on the side, I need to do my next little box. Silver is going on the top, black is going on the right, and I already have the silver bottom there. Go back through the bead that your thread was coming out of, that black bead. And then once again, I need to make my way over to that right black bead. Once you're through that right black bead there, you're going to spin around and realize you have your 2 black beads there, your silver to the bottom. I'm going to sew through that silver to the bottom. Every other row, you'll add the bead first versus second, going then to the right-hand bead. And I need to add my 3rd and final silver bead that's going to be at the top as I make this longer. From here, I need to get back to that silver bead on the top, stepping up to get ready for the next row. Once you're done here, it's that same thing on auto repeat. So you're adding 3 beads to start, then 2 beads as you get to the next one, and then 1 bead as you get to the 3rd set. You're going to keep building and building and building as you get higher and higher. You can also change up what beads you're using. So I'm going to use some 11s to pull it in, and then 8s to make it big again, and switch the design just ever so slightly, but doing the exact same thing. Like the rest of the stitches, once you have your section of crawl finish, you can see I went from my 8s to 11s. I wanted to do that to remember that you can easily go from one size to the other. That holds true for many of these stitches. And here at the end, I have my 3 black seed beads right at the top for my 3 sides of my right angle weave. And I'm just once again sewing those together, grabbing my wire guard or my wire protector, going up through, and doing the exact same thing, going into a bead on the other side, looping around that bead, reinforcing my wire guard, and then coming back down and sewing back into the project to finish off these tubular stitches. Now there's other tubular stitches that you could do. You could add in, you could do a nice Russian spiral in here, could do a spiral rope. Lots of different options, but these are going to be your 3 kind of primary round tubular stitches. When you are done with the tubular stitches, you can notice that I just did a 3.5-inch section because we're going to do a little wire working to hold this together to our magnet. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off my bracelets here, adding my wire guard to the final section of my crawl, and then I'll show you how we're going to add it all together with a little bit of flair. So to hold all of my tubular samples together, what I'm using is some 18 gauge wire. I'm going to create a little loop. That way I'm not using a jump ring. It can't come undone. And I'm attaching it with a 6mm disco ball. Any bead will work, but I'm just going to go over here to the end of my 18 gauge wire, which is pretty thick. And I'm going to make a loop. Again, videos on that as well. That loop then I'm going to connect to my clasp, making that loop, opening it up slightly, sliding my clasp on, and take that, close up that loop with your needle nose pliers, and then wrap it or coil around 2 times. From here then, go ahead and cut off that extra wire. Nice thick wire. Grab your disco ball, stick that onto the wire. Here at the end, bang your pliers back 90 degrees. Make your loop on the other side to match up the piece. This also works great for a tubular sample necklace. Challenge some of you to do that. If you do so, make sure to comment in the comments and let us know. Go ahead then, and I'm going to put them in the same order on this side. Going and putting on my first sample stitch, just sliding those wire guards right over into that loop. And we'll do the next one. Oops, backwards. First, second, and third. Once again, just like the other side, make sure you're not pinching your wire guards at all. Go ahead and round out that wire, coiling it down, turning it over, and trimming off the extra. If you have a little bit of a sharp edge, just take in with your round or with your needle nose pliers and pinch that down. This is a fun way to end the bracelet. If you want to, you could also have done the triangular stitch like we did on the flat stitch and sewed the ends to that. You could also do a glue in, or like I did here, have fun doing, oops, getting my skin pinched here, doing that nice tubular sample with that nice magnetic clasp on the opposite side. One thing to keep in mind with the tubular stitches, they will stretch just a tiny little bit. It's because of the way that they are sewn. And the reason I do this also is because those tubular stitches take a while to make. So this nice sample stitch guide has that nice finished edge, a little bit of wire working, and has all your samples right there. Thanks so much for joining me in this nice tubular sample stitch design. I like the changeover, doing a little bit of wire at the end too, makes it a conversational piece. Remember, if you do want to check out the video on the flat sample piece, you can do so, and we'll put links to that in on the page as well. When you look at that little description, click that show more or down arrow and you can get links to shop with us online if you need any of these materials. As always, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for our next inspirational video.